Hey, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving to each and every one of you. Um, those of you that are longtime listeners know that I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh on the radio a lot. My dad's job required him to drive, and so that meant summer times. My mom and I got in the car with him, and we would go wherever he had to go, part of his territory. So anyway, I got to spend a lot of time listening to Rush, and one of the things he always did, this that I want to carry this tradition on, is the real story of Thanksgiving. Um, I know it sounds may sound weird to you, but what you were taught in school probably isn't what really happened on Thanksgiving. And I know the first time I heard it, I was shocked and surprised, not really surprised, but you know, was introduced to the whole you need to find out for yourself the true story of things. So, anyway, every year Rush would say this. Now that we've lost him, like I said, I want to carry on this tradition because it meant so much to me. It really launched the holidays, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I always did. So, you were probably taught that we gave thanks to the Indians. The Indians taught us how to grow corn, maize, make popcorn, all that. It's amazing to stop and think about it. I don't know what you were taught about Thanksgiving, but I was taught a version that goes much like this. The pilgrims showed up, they were incompetent. They were well intentioned, good hearted people, but incompetent. They didn't know how to do anything. They were stumbling and bumbling around in a foreign place, had no idea even where they were. And as they're on the verge of starvation, the Indians stumbled upon them and showed them how to basically live. Gave them everything, showed them how to grow crops, kill turkey, and build teepees and stuff. So the pilgrims survived, and we were giving thanks. The Thanksgiving is to acknowledge the Indians' role in saving the first pilgrims. Now, it's a quaint story, and it's attached itself to a number of people, but it's nothing to do with Thanksgiving, really. It is far removed from what the first Thanksgiving is really about. Thanksgiving, George Washington first proclaimed it. Thanksgiving, well, who was thanking who for what? That's the root of the error. The root is of it is that the pilgrims must have been giving thanks to the Indians for saving them. That's not what the pilgrims were thankful for, as you'll soon hear. The story of the pilgrims begins in the early part of the 17th century. That's the 1600s for those of you in Rio Linda, California. The Church of England, under King James I, was persecuting anyone and everyone who did not recognize its absolute civil and spiritual authority. The first pilgrims were Christian rebels, folks. Those who challenged King James' ecclesiastical authority and those who believed strongly in freedom of worship were hunted down, imprisoned, and sometimes executed for their beliefs in England in the 1600s. Can you imagine that? It's an awful, terrifying thought. Terrifying enough that these people got on ships and went to this new promised land. It continues a group of separatists, Christians who didn't want to buy into the Church of England or live under the rule of King James, first fled to Holland and established a community of themselves there. After 11 years, about 40 of them, having heard about this new world Christopher Columbus had discovered, decided to go. 40 of them agreed to make a perilous journey into the new world, where they knew they would certainly face hardships, But the reason they did it was so they could live and worship God according to the dictates of their own consciousness and beliefs. On August 1st, 1620, the Mayflower set sail. It carried a total of 102 passengers, including 40 pilgrims. Now known as Pilgrims, led by William Bradford on the journey, Bradford set up an agreement, a contract, that established how they would live once they got there. The contract set forth just and equal laws for all members of the new community, irrespective of their religious beliefs or political beliefs. And did the revolutionary ideas expressed in the Mayflower Compact come from? Where did these ideas come from? They came from the Bible. The Pilgrims were a devoutly religious people completely steeped in the lessons of the Old and New Testaments. They looked to the ancient Israelites for their example, and because of the biblical precedents set forth in Scripture, they never doubted that their experiment would work. They believed in God. They believed that they were in the hands of God. As you know, there is no pleasure cruise, friends. The journey to the new world on the tiny, by today's standards, really tiny, sailing ship, it was long and arduous. There was sickness, there was seasickness, it was wet, it was the opposite of anything you think of today as a cruise on the open ocean. When they landed in New England in November, they found, according to Bradford's detailed journal, a cold, barren, desolate wilderness. There were no friends to greet them, he wrote. There were no houses to shelter them. There were no inns that they could refresh themselves. There was nothing. Imagine that. Nothing. Just absolutely nothing. We would be terrified today. The sacrifice they had made for freedom was just beginning. During the first winter, half the pilgrims, including Bradford's own wife, died of either starvation, sickness, or exposure. They endured that first winter. When spring finally came, they had by that time met the indigenous people, the Indians. And indeed, the Indians taught the settlers how to plant corn, fish for cod, and skin beavers and other animals for coats. But there wasn't any prosperity. They did not prosper. They were still dependent. They were still confused. They were still in a new place, essentially alone among like minded people. This is important to understand because this is where modern American history lessons often end. Thanksgiving is actually explained in some textbooks as a holiday for which the pilgrims gave thanks to the Indians for saving their lives rather than what it really was. That happened, don't misunderstand, that all happened, but that's not, according to William Bradford's journal, what they ultimately gave thanks for. Here's the part that's been omitted: the original contract that they made on the Mayflower as they were traveling to the New World. They actually had to enter into that contract with their merchant sponsors in London because they had no money on their own. They needed a sponsor. They found merchants in London to sponsor them. The merchants in London were making an investment, and as such, the pilgrims agreed that everything they produced go into a common store or bank, common account. And each member of the community was entitled to one common share in this bank. Out of this, the merchants would be repaid until they were paid off. Hmm, what does that sound like to you? Sounds like indentured servitude, a form of slavery. All of the land they cleared and the houses they built belonged to the community as well. Everything belonged to everybody, and everybody had one share in it. They were going to distribute it equally. That was considered to be the epitome of fairness, sharing the hardship burdens that everything like that. Nobody owned anything. It was a commune, folks. It was the forerunner to the communes from the 60s and 70s out in California and other parts of the country, and it was complete with organic vegetables, by the way. Bradford, who had become the new governor of the colony, recognized that it wasn't working. it was as costly and destructive. His own journals chronicled the reasons it didn't work. Bradford assigned a plot of land to fix this to each family to work and manage as their own. He got rid of the whole commune structure and assigned a plot of land to each family to work and manage. And whatever they made, however much they made, was theirs. They could sell it, they could share it, they could keep it, whatever they wanted to. What really happened is they turned loose the power of a free market after enduring months and months of hardships. First in the Mayflower, and then getting settled, and then the failure of the common account from which everybody got the same share. There was no incentive for anybody to do anything. And as is human nature, some of the pilgrims were a bunch of lazy twerps, and others busted their rear ends. But it didn't matter because even the people that weren't very industrious got the same as everyone else. Bradford wrote about how this just wasn't working. What Bradford and his community found, I'm going to use basically his own words, was that the most creative and industrious people had no incentive to work any harder than anyone else. While most of the rest of the world had been experimenting with socialism for well over 100 years, trying to refine it, perfect it, and reinvent it, the Pilgrims decided early on, William Bradford decided, to scrap it permanently because it brought out the worst in human nature, it emphasized laziness, it created resentment. Because in every group of people, you've got your self starters, you've got your hard workers, and your industrious people, and you've got your lazy twerps, and so forth. And there's no difference at the end of the day. The resentment sprang up on both sides. So Bradford wrote about this. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent, and retard much employment that would have been in their benefit and comfort. For young men that were most able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children's without any recompense, without any repayment. That was thought injustice. Why should you work for other people when you can't work for yourself? What's the point? The pilgrims found that people could not be expected to do their best work without incentive. So, what did Bradford's community try next? They unharnessed the power of good old free enterprise by invoking the undergirding capitalistic principle of private property. Every family was assigned its own plot of land to work and permitted to market its own crops and products. And what was the result? This had very good success, wrote Bradford, for it made all hands, everybody, industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been. Is it possible that supply side economics could have existed before the 1980s? In no time, the pilgrims found they had more food than they could eat themselves. Now, this is where it gets really good, folks. If you're laboring under the misconception that I was, as I was taught in school, so they set up trading posts and exchanged goods with the Indians. The profits allowed them to pay off their debts to the merchants in London. And the success and prosperity of the Plymouth settlement attracted more Europeans and began to what came to be known as the Great Puritan Migration. The word of the success of the free enterprise Plymouth colony spread like wildfire, and that began the Great Migration. Everybody wanted a part of it. There was no mass slaughtering of the Indians. There was no wiping out of the indigenous people. And eventually, in William Bradford's own journal, unleashing the industriousness of all hands ended up producing more than they could ever need themselves. So trading posts began selling and exchanging things with the Indians, and the Indians, by the way, were very helpful. Puritan kids had relationships with the children of the Native Americans that they found. This killing the indigenous people stuff they're talking about much later has nothing to do with the first Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving was William Bradford and Plymouth Colony thanking God for their blessings. That's the first Thanksgiving. Nothing wrong with being grateful to the Indians. Don't misunderstand. But the true meaning of Thanksgiving And this is what George Washington recognized in his first Thanksgiving proclamation. Thank you guys for allowing me to share with you this little excerpt of history that really makes you think. Um, and I hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving weekend and know that without a doubt, how truly thankful for you I am personally, my wife, my family, and never forget it. We love you, and I will be here to see you all very soon. Have a happy and blessed Thanksgiving. Thank you all. Godspeed.